When Russ asked me to do this little presentation, I thought that, well, this is going to be simple because all it is a matter of how I finished one particular ore car that Brian had designed, one that I really liked on his layout. But the more I looked into this, I realized that that wasn't going to be the focus of this thing at all, really. I imagined that it'd be basically a short construction article of the car design I decided to use on my own operation. But as I learned of his endeavors, I found that there was a lot more to this than I had imagined. And it became not so much a construction article, but rather more interestingly, a short history of Brian's quest for the perfect ore car. I'd always admired Brian's Alaskan operation and his fleet of cars that made it possible. At my first visit to the Copper River in Yukon, there were two types of cars in general use. There was a longer, more modern steel hopper and a shorter, older looking hopper. There closest to the camera are the first two cars I believe that Brian designed. The ones behind it, however, were the ones that I was interested in. This first type of car can be seen here. It was, as near as I can tell, it was constructed from an AccuCraft HO hopper, and the details like the ladders and that sort of thing that's on it came from a Grantline SN3 reefer hardware kit. It has been suggested that the sides were cut down on the top with the intention of perhaps adding boards in the openings there, but I've never seen an example of any boards ever being put in there. The car that interested me the most was this shorter one. The particular ore cars held a particular fascination ever since I watched Brian build them at the 21st Narrow Gauge Convention back in Salt Lake. As he sat at his vendor's table, he constructed these cars, and they just seemed so simple and fascinating to me that I thought I got to do this. When I got a chance to operate them on his layout in Seattle, I was pretty well hooked. I needed to build an ore car operation for sure on my layout. I knew he had several designs of car in process, but my choice had always been this short steel hopper car that he seemed to have in abundance. This was perhaps from my younger days watching the Union Pacific and its long trains of short steel ore cars being sent into Geneva Steel here in the Salt Lake Valley. I might mention that this car is at home on Jim Brown's layout, who I appreciate him sending me the picture of that one. Upon Brian's unfortunate passing, I was fortunate to acquire a bit of his equipment. Among it was one of these ore cars. The fire was once again lit, only to dwindle again with all of the other projects needed to get the layout up and going. So this project went into a hiatus once again. Finally, a couple of years back, the mining end of my railroad began to take shape. Good friend Bill Adkins graciously donated a few cars he had also acquired of these, so I didn't have to build quite as many. Thank you very much, Bill. Here's the way that those cars that I inherited from Bill in their first operation on my own railroad. Another friend, Russ Signer, mentioned he had ended up with a lot of the styrene parts and patterns that Brian had cut for his ore car projects and offered what he had to me graciously. I truly am blessed with great friends, as you'll see. After sorting the 3 boxes of styrene parts Russ sent me, I was able to identify some of the pieces as belonging to this particular car type. Among Russ's collection of parts was one of this style, about half completed, and some parts for 3 others. I assume Brian's final 4 of that project. As if you know Brian tended to build in quantities of 10 or whatever he needed, but 10 seemed to be his basic number that he went to. So I assumed that this was the last of a set of 10. But as I learned more and more, there were more of these out there than I thought. Brian was a firm believer in if you're going to make one of something, 40 was better. And as I say, this is just one of 3 boxes of parts like this that I got. And trying to sort them all as to what car they went to was quite a project. And it led me to believe that there was a whole lot more to this project that I had ever envisioned. A visit by Aaron Splon resulted in acquiring one more completed car that he had acquired for this type, which was great. That was one less that I had to build. This would allow me to complete a set of 10 cars for my own operation. And I'm going to pause here for just a minute to kind of give you a brief history of the cars that I'm building. And this was told to me by Bill Adkins, who was fairly instrumental in the construction of some of these cars. And these are Bill's words here. He says, Brian was obsessed with finding the perfect ore car for his operation and was working on many different designs. Unfortunately, he had not really decided on one when he really needed ore cars to begin operating sessions. These cars were built as a simple, less detailed, temporary solution and were never meant to last on the layout long. When it was time to decal them, Bill asked Brian what number of series he wanted to put on them, to which Brian replied, whatever you want, they're only temporary anyway. If you knew Brian, you knew he took great pride in the fact that his railroad was in no way similar to the DNRGW and never would be. So Bill naturally selected the 400 series of numbers, and not just any numbers, but the 400 numbers of the DNRGWKs. Brian remained stoic upon the delivery of these cars, and Bill thought perhaps his joke was missed. But before long, Brian, with a straight face, pointed to car number 455, which Bill had painted black, different than the others, and simply said, after the wreck, right? Brian didn't miss much. And that was the story. Now, construction was pretty simple. It began for me with the completion of the car Brian had not finished. It was a pretty simple construction involving a piece of 1/4-inch square brass with milled ends to mount KD coupler boxes to by means of a 256 screw. This served as the car's frame and also brought the weight of the car up to about the same as a PBL kit. This provided plenty of weight for good operation. 2 more 256 holes were drilled and tapped to mount the trucks with this piece of brass, providing the weight for the car as well. The body of the car consisted of a pair of Grant Line ON2 Koppel ore car ends and levers, with the rest of the body built with evergreen styrene shapes. I began by gluing the Koppel ends on the inverted V-shaped slope sheets. Styrene sides were next, followed by the various styrene shapes that completed the side support. Styrene end platforms were added next. Hand grabs and stirrup steps completed the basic structure. And here it is with the platforms on. What it's lacking here still is the wood that he put on the ends. Here's 3 more cars under construction. I discovered Brian had used Tichy HO arch bar trucks for his cars. PBL SN3 metal wheels were added by shortening the bolster just a bit on each end before gluing the side frames on. As luck would have it, I had already purchased some of these arch bar trucks in anticipation of building my own cars for my operation. Finishing touches included a brake cylinder mounted to the side of the brass underframe, paint, wooden planks added to each end as a deck, a brake staff and a wheel on one platform completed the car body. A very simple construction with just enough detail to make it passable for operation until a more detailed fleet could be built. After all, these were just temporary. As I was finishing the completion of the 4 cars, I began pondering how to match the paint. Knowing that Bill Adkins had painted them for Brian, I called him to see if perhaps he remembered the process. Fortunately, he did. Floquil grimy black oversprayed with Floquil earth, followed by a rust color. Great, where am I going to get Floquil paint? But the great surprise of this conversation, Bill still had leftover decals from the project. That was a very nice surprise. As for the paint, I use a weathered black from Model Masters, followed by a light dusting of a light Model Masters tan color for the bottom. Decals were applied, dull coated, and the car was then finished with pan pastel rust and brown colored powders. Here is the completed car and how it fares against Brian's efforts. The 483 is the one that I constructed. The 473 was constructed by Brian. Loads were constructed using a styrofoam shape covered with ore. A piece of metal was buried within it to make the removal of the magnet possible. I've not built any of these as I run live loads, but this seems like a very great idea to me. A couple of weeks ago, I sent out a plea to friends asking if anyone might have taken photos of this ongoing project of Brian's. Again, good friends came to the rescue. Not only did they send me some great construction pictures of these temporary cars, I was sent pictures of many other designs Brian was considering for their replacement. A great number of the unidentified in Russ's collection of parts began to make more sense now. Perhaps the future will see even more of Brian's designs resurrected on my railroad. Here's just a few of Brian's designs. Can't tell you much about any of these cars other than I've got a few parts other than that. Probably the most obscure of these, I think, is the brown colored car. And I believe that it was made from another HO kit, but I can't tell you which one. And I'm not sure if that car was completed or not, but that's the only picture I've seen of one. This car, I do have some jigs and a lot of the parts in these bags match this car. So I think that he had planned to build a number of these. Kind of a nice looking car. This car, I think is also a very interesting car. It's a little longer than what I like since I like the short cars, but it's very interesting to me that it appears to be two of the Grant Line ON2 Koppel cars glued end to end. Here's a picture of it painted. Nice looking car. I really like that. Here's a closing shot of a string of Brian's cars. I know all of these were not all of the cars, as I've seen other designs, and I actually have a few other uncompleted cars in these bags of parts. Perhaps even more of them will come to light in the future, as there are a great many parts here that seem to fit none of these designs that I've seen. Now I'll give you a brief history of kind of how these fit on my own railroad, since a lot of folks know that I'm a pretty diehard third division plan, and they've kind of asked me how these ore cars fit into my third division. So here's a brief history of that. My own railroad is modeled on the third division of the Rio Grande between Gunnison and Ridgeway. So how does this ore operation really fit in? Well, the Timber Creek Railway dates from the construction days of this division. Initially, it was a logging road near Crested Butte, constructed by the contractor who was supplying ties and timbers for the Rio Grande's construction. In the waning years of this logging operation, precious ore was discovered in the poverty area above Crested Butte, and the railroad found a new life hauling ore with nothing to haul it in. So a search of available equipment was began. The reason for such a wide variety of used rolling stock and even locomotives rescued from falling railroads. And I'll close this here with just a few shots of these cars that work on my railroad now. Here's a string of them waiting to go up in the tipple at Poverty to be loaded for a trip to the smelter. Here again is the string of 10 empty ore cars headed for the tipple. And here's the same train once again pulling away from the Crow's Perch water tank. So, and that's the pictures I have so far of them on my layout. One thing I would like to do before I close here is extend my very deep appreciation to Russ and Bill Adkins and Jim Brown for their much needed contributions to this project. And Russ says he's still digging, so we may unearth more of this kind of stuff, and we just may have more ore cars design. Now that I see the parts, I'm really getting interested in the other cars as well. So thanks, guys. And there it is. If somebody's got some questions, I'd be happy to entertain that.
Okay, let's see. We've got some questions showing up on the chat. The first is from Jake Sweeney, and he says, what are the overall dimensions of these cars?
Well, they're just the width of a box car, and they're probably twice as long as the width.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And yeah, Jim Brown just comments. He says it was a great presentation, Doug. Thanks for sharing. Well,
thank you, Jim. I wouldn't have been able to do a lot of it without your photographs. So thank you very much.
And let's see, yeah, Don Morenzi in the chat box provided a number of things. He said the covered hopper type cars were used for copper concentrate, used between the mill and the concentrator and a smelter. He says similar cars were used in northern Michigan and on the Tucson, Cornelia, and Gila Bend Railroad in Arizona. And that's probably what Brian used as an inspiration.
That would be my guess. There's also another car that Russ and I kind of talked about the other day that's appears to be sort of a low gondola with some canisters that sit in it. And I never seen any of those on Brian's layout, but I suspect that that was sort of the same idea, putting a concentrator. Russ thought it might be something that was really heavy that went in those canisters. But
I have a number of those canisters. They're rectangular in shape with corrugated steel sides. And I would be happy to send them to you.
well, we may have to build some of those canister cars.
Who
As we
was
decide
we?
what we're going to put in them.
Yeah, be careful with the word we.
Oh no, I don't do anything by myself, Russ. I've got great friends.
Let's see. Yeah, Mark Evans says, nice presentation, Doug.
Thanks, Mark.
And yeah, Jake Sweeney took a look at the slides again, I think, and said, really nice scenery work too.
Well, he must have been looking at Brian's. Thank you.